Okay. Okay, this week's Parsha is Beha'alotcha. Beha'alotcha has so many different things happening in it. Many different ideas. There is a string that runs through it all. But in the limited time we have, I want to pick really actually two aspects that seem like they have no real connection, and we'll see a very deep connection. So I'm going to jump towards the middle of the Parsha, where we have the mitzvah of what we call Pesach Sheni. Some of you come to my Tuesday class, and most likely about a month ago, we discussed Pesach Sheni. But this is where it is found in the Torah. What is Pesach Sheni? Just in case we need a review. In the desert, the year after we came out of Mitzrayim, so when the people of Israel kept Pesach, there were a number of people who were ritually impure. And to bring the Paschal offering, the Korban Pesach, you had to be in a state of ritual purity. And so these few people came to Moshe, and I wouldn't say complained, but they felt bad that they weren't included in bringing the Paschal offering. And especially because according to tradition, they were involved in a mitzvah. They were involved in burying someone, and they became impure. So why should we miss out on this mitzvah? So Moshe actually did not know how to answer them, and he took the question to God. And God revealed that if someone is impure or is far away, then they would have a second chance to bring the Paschal offering a month later, on the 14th of the month of Iyar, a full month later. They could bring the Paschal offering. So what we learn from this is, first of all, how important God saw their desire to be part of this mitzvah. This apparently, we could think anyways, that this is a mitzvah that would not have been in the Torah had people not asked for it. And the reason they asked for it is they truly desired not to miss out on a mitzvah. And so God revealed this whole mitzvah for their sake. So this is actually an amazing concept. But the two things that qualify someone to bring a offering a month later, Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach, is if someone was impure or they were too far away. So that's pretty nebulous. What does too far away mean? Doesn't stipulate in the Torah. But over the word far away, there's a dot over the letter Hey. Now, dots do not appear that often in the Torah, but anytime they appear, it's to tell us that there's some oral tradition that we need to understand just to be able to understand the simple literal meaning of the text. So in the Mishnah of the tractate of Psachim, in the 9th chapter, if anyone wants to look it up, the 9th chapter, the second Mishnah, there's two opinions as what too far away is. One of them, and I imagine that when you hear this, the alarm bells will go off because I'll get to it later. It's from Modi'in and farther, a circumference. So according to the sages, the ancient city of Modi'in was 15 mil. We call it a mile. It wasn't exactly a mile, but they had a measurement called a mil. It was like in the ballpark of what a mile is. And that Modi'in was considered 15 miles from Jerusalem. So therefore, one of the commentaries, the Bartanura, says that if a person would get up at dawn and get on their donkey, which was a main mode of travel in those days, they could be in the temple in enough time to bring the Korban Pesach. So therefore, someone could not use as an excuse that I was too far away if they were in a circumference around Jerusalem from Modi'in and inward. That's the first opinion. That was Rabbi Akiva's opinion. And the other opinion is even from the courtyard and outwards. Meaning, let's say someone traveled a long distance and they even make it to Jerusalem and it's late in the afternoon and you can only bring the Pesach offering up to a certain time. And they couldn't quite make it to the temple. They're like 100 meters away. So the second opinion is even that person could bring a second Paschal offering, meaning it's a very lenient opinion, very lenient. Even if you're standing right outside the temple and you get distracted and you lose track of time, you still, in a sense, have the excuse that you're too far away. So we learn from this a very simple idea, which is very profound, is that no one is so impure or so far away that they don't deserve another chance. Simple teaching, but of course it has profound ramifications, that no one is too far away. No one is too cut off. No one is too estranged that God and the Torah is not going to give them another chance if they want another chance. So that's the simple understanding of Pesach Sheni. But now we're going to see an amazing connection, because we mentioned that the first opinion of Rabbi Akiva is from Modi'in and farther. You're too far away if you're beyond Modi'in. So for those who know some Jewish history, so Modi'in was the ancient home of Mattityahu and his 5 sons, known as the Maccabees. And according to tradition, the revolt against the Greeks began in Modi'in. So here we're talking about Pesach, but there's like this hidden dimension of Hanukkah here. So how do we put this together? So if we go back to the beginning of this parsha, beginning of Beha'alotcha, it begins with God commanding, not for the first time. It actually appears a number of times. Each time we learn something new, that Aaron should light the menorah. And what is the context here? Why is the Torah repeating this idea of lighting the menorah, which we've already had in the Torah? So like I said, every time the Torah repeats itself, there's always a new idea that is found there. So if we look at Rashi, so Rashi gives us an answer. He says there's a juxtaposition here. What's the end of the previous Torah portion of Naso? This is the gifts that the princes brought on the day that the Mishkan was dedicated. And he brings the midrash that says that Aaron and the Kohanim actually felt very bad after all of the princes had brought their gifts. Why? They had an idea in their heads. Let's see what all the other princes bring. And if there's something lacking, so we'll bring it. We'll make up. So instead of kind of like jumping in and bringing presents, gifts during the dedication of the Mishkan, which went on for 12 days. Each day was for one of the tribes. Well, here's the tribe of Levi. And you don't see that they brought in any gifts. So Rashi tells us that Aaron felt bad. It's like, oh, we missed out. We also wanted to bring gifts, but there's more than enough now. So God comforts Aaron and says, the mitzvah that you have to light the candles, in a sense, is more important than all of the gifts that they brought. That's what Rashi says. So other commentaries, though, expand this. Rashi doesn't say this, but other commentaries expand this and say, well, what happens when there is no temple? We have the Chanukiah of Hanukkah, that the mitzvah that Aaron was given was not just for the time of the temple or the time of the tabernacle, that the Chanukiah that we light during Hanukkah represents the menorah. And therefore, it continues. So the mitzvah that Aaron was given, even after the temple is destroyed, even after the Mishkan no longer exists, in a sense, the mitzvah of lighting candles in memory of the great miracle that happened with the menorah still exists. So now we have a connection between Modi'in, Pesach Sheni, and Hanukkah. But if we go one step deeper, if we look at the miracle of what happened during Hanukkah, we see that, in a sense, the message is exactly the same thing as Pesach Sheni. Why? Because when the Maccabees conquered the temple and drove the Greeks out, the temple was totally desecrated. And as the story goes, it's actually written in the Talmud, in Masechet Shabbat, that they cleansed the temple and they wanted to get what's called the service in the temple going again. And part of that is lighting the menorah. And they could not find any pure oil. And sometimes when the gates are open, so we need to go through. And so here, after the temple had been desecrated, and now they have cleansed it, they didn't want to wait to make new olive oil. So, but what were they to do? Because they couldn't find any. And what we're told is that they were able to find one small cruse of oil, pure oil, that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol on it. And with that oil, a miracle occurred, and it was only, as far as they were concerned, was only enough for one day. And it lasted for 8 days. So what does this cruse of oil represent? Well, in just different language, it represents the very same thing as Pesach Sheni, that no one is too impure or far away that they can't come back. So in real terms, this is mentioned every Hanukkah. If we look at even modern history, is for those who followed the struggle of Russian Jewry to come to Israel. Now, during communism, there was harsh oppression against anyone who kept any semblance of Jewish tradition. Thousands of people were sent to Siberia for circumcising their children, for teaching them Hebrew, for any communication with Israel whatsoever. And many people died in the experience. And after 70 years of communism, there was practically an entire generation that the only thing they knew about being Jewish was that on their internal passport, it was marked that they were Jewish. Most of them had never been to a synagogue, didn't know any of the rituals. The communists did a very thorough job. And then in 1967, when Israel, the world expected Israel to be wiped out. Most people in Israel expected to be wiped out. And then we had the incredible miracle of the 6-Day War. And what happened in Russia is astounding. You had millions of Jews who know nothing, absolutely nothing about being Jewish. This surge of Jewish pride just welled up in a whole generation. And that's where the Russian refuseniks came, and the whole movement to get out of Russia and come to Israel. And in short, over 1 million Jews came to Israel once the Iron Wall came down. And for those who remember, there was a huge movement in America. It was one of the biggest marches on Washington. There was 250,000 people. There was a huge march on Washington in favor of let my people go. So I'm bringing this all up as just an example of like how far away could you be? How estranged, how cut off could you be? And then people were risking going to Siberia, and thousands ended up in Siberia. Everyone knows the story of Natan Sharansky, who ended up in jail for 12 years, and many, many other refuseniks ended up in jail in Siberia, lost their jobs. But once that spark, that little cruise of oil was ignited, there was no stopping it. And the other example is what we'll call the Baal Tshuva movement. Here you had we'll go back to the 60s and the 70s, where again, you had a good part of the young Jews in America who knew very, very little about their Jewish tradition. Many of them actually ran away from it because it seemed so non-spiritual, so not relevant to our lives. And then all of a sudden, you have this huge movement of people coming back to Torah. And the same thing has happened in Israel. You have literally hundreds of thousands of people who were brought up very secular, who one way or another found their way back to Jewish tradition. So here we see an amazing connection that we wouldn't see if we didn't 1 and 1 equals 2. Because here you have Pesach Sheni, and it doesn't even mention in the Torah about Modi'in, but in the oral tradition it mentions Modi'in. And it turns out at the beginning of the Parsha is a hint to Hanukkah, and then you have Pesach Sheni, and the message is virtually the same. This idea of no one is too far away that A spark can't be lit. So I'll just add one other layer here, is that for those who know, I live in Mivo Modi'im. I live in this place called Modi'im. Now we don't know, to this day, they don't know exactly where the ancient Modi'im is. There's 3 or 4 archaeological digs right in our area. Any of them could have been, and at some point they will find some evidence, but it is clear to everyone that this whole area, in fact, our whole regional council is called Modi'in. And listen to some of the names of the settlements. First of all, we were the first ones here. We're going back 46 years now. There was no other settlements in this area, nothing. And then came Matatiyahu, and then came Chashmonaim, and then came Maccabim, and then came Lapid. Lapid means a flame. And then you have the huge city of Modi'in. So most of these settlements in this area are named in connection to Hanukkah. So, but what's significant is that the people who first came to our yeshuv were almost all Bali Tshuva. Were all people who at one point were very far away, almost to the extreme, and we found our way back to Jewish tradition. And Dafka, we were the ones who settled Modi'in. And that's the idea that no one is too far away. So that's just an amazing, amazing connection, a very, very amazing connection. So I'm going to end with a blessing, that we take this to heart. We all have our ups and downs. We all have our ins and outs. But anytime we're on the out or we're down, we should always remember you can't get so down that you can't get back up again. That's the verse says, Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'kam. A tzaddik falls 7 times and gets up. That's the point of the tzaddik in all of us, is the ability to get back up again. So I want to bless all of us that, first of all, we don't have to get to that kind of place to realize this, but that we all know that we all deserve a second chance, and that God and the Torah provide for us. This is what's called tshuva. This is the whole idea of coming close. There's no end to how close you can come. Doing tshuva is not just like this for things that I've done wrong, but tshuva on the deeper level means you can always get closer. So if one feels far away, we should just know that we can always get close again.